In a time of spiritual decay and national confusion, when Israel was trapped in a cycle of sin and silence from heaven, a flicker of hope began to burn quietly in the heart of a woman burdened by sorrow. This is not just the story of Samuel, it is the story of how God uses pain to birth purpose, how silence is not absence, and how one desperate prayer can ignite a legacy that changes a nation. Samuel's arrival into history was not random. It was divinely orchestrated at the very hour when Israel was in desperate need of a prophet, a voice, a leader. He was the bridge between the era of judges and the dawn of kings. And it all began with a woman on her knees, not with a sword or a throne, but with a broken heart poured out in a whispered vow. Year after year, Hannah's barrenness mocked her. In a culture where childbearing defined a woman's worth, she carried not only the pain of unfulfilled dreams but also the cruel taunts of her rival, Peninnah. The annual pilgrimage to Shiloh, which should have been a moment of spiritual renewal, became a harsh reminder of what she lacked. Yet amid the cruelty, something sacred was being stirred. Pain often feels like punishment, but in Hannah's case, it was preparation. 1 Samuel 1 verse 10 captures the depth of her anguish. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. This wasn't a casual prayer. It was a soul-breaking cry, the kind that only comes when you've reached the end of yourself. And in that place of desperation, Hannah didn't run from God, she ran to Him. Have you already clicked on the like button and subscribed to the channel? This helps us understand that you are enjoying our videos and YouTube is sending you more. We count on your help. Let's go back to the video. Her vow was simple, but it echoed with eternal significance. If God would give her a son, she would give him back. Not for a few years, not for a symbolic act, but for life. This was more than a transaction. It was surrender. She was asking for a blessing not to possess but to release. And it's in that posture of total surrender that miracles are born. When Eli, the priest, misunderstood her silent, trembling lips as drunkenness, it revealed how far even the spiritual leaders had fallen. But Hannah's gentle reply, "I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have poured out my soul before the Lord," became a quiet indictment of the spiritual apathy around her. In her grief, she showed more faith and fire than the priests who were meant to lead. Eli, humbled by her sincerity, blessed her. And something changed. The pain did not disappear instantly, but peace entered in. 1 Samuel 1 verse 18 says, "Her face was no longer sad." That's the kind of peace that surpasses understanding, the kind that comes when you know God has heard you even before the answer arrives. And the answer did come. "And the Lord remembered her," says verse 19. Hannah conceived and bore a son, naming him Samuel, "because I asked the Lord for him." Every time she whispered his name, she was declaring, "God hears." Samuel was not just a child, he was a testimony, a living symbol of divine response. Yet Hannah did not cling to what she was given. When the time came, she kept her vow. She weaned her son, likely around age 3, and brought him to Shiloh, not just with Samuel, but with a sacrificial offering of 3 bulls, flour, and wine. This was no reluctant sacrifice. It was worship. She stood before Eli once again and said, "I am the woman who stood here beside you, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." This act of dedication wasn't just about Samuel, it was about her faith in God's bigger plan. Then, as if the floodgates of heaven had opened, Hannah burst forth in song. In 1 Samuel 2, her prayer becomes poetry, a declaration of divine truth. She begins, "My heart rejoices in the Lord my horn is lifted high." Her words soar with joy but also with prophetic power. She declares that God reverses destinies. He lifts the humble, humbles the proud, raises the poor from the dust, and seats them with princes. Her song wasn't just personal, it was prophetic. She saw ahead to a time when God would raise up a king, and ultimately, a Messiah. She ends with the stunning line, "He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed." There was no king in Israel yet, but Hannah spoke as if she could already see the crown forming in the distance. Samuel's early years in the tabernacle were shaped by both grace and contrast. While he ministered faithfully before the Lord, Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, brought corruption and shame to the priesthood. 1 Samuel 2 verse 12 calls them worthless men. They did not know the Lord. They treated holy things with contempt, taking meat by force and dishonoring women. Yet in this dark environment, a child served with purity. It's a reminder that light doesn't wait for perfect conditions to shine. It shines brighter in darkness. Verse 26 says, Now the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with man. This same phrase would later be used of Jesus in Luke 2 verse 52. The connection is not accidental. Samuel, like Christ, was set apart from birth for a divine mission. As Samuel grew, God began to speak again through him. In a time when the word of the Lord was rare, Samuel became the vessel through which heaven's silence was broken. But all of it began with a barren woman, a whispered prayer, and a child given fully to God. Samuel's life reminds us that God does not need impressive beginnings to fulfill his promises. He needs surrendered hearts, faithful obedience, and the willingness to release what we treasure most into his hands. And maybe, just maybe, your own unanswered prayers are not denials, but divine delays because God is preparing something far greater than what you asked for. The return of the Ark of the Covenant marked a turning point in Israel's spiritual journey, yet it also revealed how far the people had drifted from a proper reverence for God. Even in their joy, some approached the holy object with irreverence, resulting in divine judgment. This solemn moment reminded the nation that the presence of God was not something to be taken lightly. As the people grieved over the deaths in Beth Shemesh, their hearts became more tender, more receptive to divine correction. It was precisely in this fragile spiritual state that Samuel's voice rose again, not just as a prophet but as a national guide. His earlier call had been confirmed by years of faithful service, and now, with the ark restored and hearts humbled, Samuel's influence became essential for guiding Israel toward true spiritual reform. God had been preparing Samuel for this moment from the very beginning, and now the time had come for him to step forward as the central figure in Israel's spiritual renewal. Samuel knew that Israel's victories would never come merely by military strength or political strategy. The core issue was always spiritual. He called the people to a national gathering at Mizpah, where they would confess their sins and recommit to the Lord. In 1 Samuel 7 verse 6, the people gathered and poured out water before the Lord, symbolizing their repentance and cleansing. They fasted and acknowledged their guilt, setting the stage for a new covenant relationship. Samuel prayed for the people, acting as an intercessor between them and God. This moment at Mizpah was more than a ceremony, it was the spiritual reset of a nation. And just as their hearts turned back to the Lord, their enemies approached. The Philistines advanced on Israel, hoping to strike while they were vulnerable. But this time the battle would not be theirs alone. Samuel cried out to the Lord on Israel's behalf, and God responded in thunder, confusing the enemy and granting Israel a miraculous victory. This was not just a triumph of arms, it was a divine confirmation that when Israel returned to God, he would fight for them. This miraculous deliverance became a defining moment in Samuel's leadership. To commemorate it, he set up a stone and named it Ebenezer, saying, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." 1 Samuel 7 verse 12. That stone stood as a permanent testimony, not just of a military victory but of spiritual restoration. Samuel understood that without God the people were nothing. And so he worked tirelessly to maintain Israel's devotion to the Lord. He traveled in a continuous circuit, judging and guiding the people from city to city. Unlike previous leaders who remained in fixed locations, Samuel's mobile ministry ensured that the word of God reached all corners of the nation. His leadership was not based on charisma or lineage, but on obedience and intimacy with the voice of God. The people saw in him a man who carried divine authority, not because of his position, but because of his relationship with the Lord. Under Samuel's guidance, Israel experienced a rare period of peace and spiritual clarity, as the nation rediscovered its identity as the people of God. But as time passed, the people began to worry about the future. Samuel was growing old, and his sons, whom he had appointed as judges, did not walk in his ways. This fear led the people to a radical request. They asked for a king to rule over them, like all the other nations. 1 Samuel 8 verse 5. This request wounded Samuel deeply, but he brought their words before the Lord. God's response was sobering. "They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me as their king." 1 Samuel 8 verse 7. It was not merely a political shift, but a spiritual rebellion. Still, God permitted Samuel to grant their request, but not without warning them of what a human king would demand: taxes, forced labor, and the possibility of tyranny. Samuel painted a clear picture of the consequences, but the people insisted. They were willing to trade divine leadership for human governance. Even in disappointment, Samuel remained faithful. He obeyed God's instruction and anointed Israel's first king, Saul, thus beginning a new chapter in the nation's history. Samuel's role did not diminish with the rise of monarchy. In fact, it became even more critical. As the prophet of God, he served as the moral compass for the new king. When Saul strayed from God's commands, Samuel was there to confront him. One of the most defining confrontations occurred in 1 Samuel 15, when Saul failed to fully obey God's instructions regarding the Amalekites. When Saul claimed he had obeyed, Samuel famously replied, "To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams." 1 Samuel 15 verse 22. That rebuke sealed Saul's fate. His kingship was rejected by God. Samuel mourned deeply, but his prophetic integrity would not allow him to excuse disobedience. He was not swayed by power or prestige. His loyalty remained with God alone. This unshakable faithfulness distinguished Samuel as one of Israel's greatest prophets, a man who stood as a mouthpiece of divine justice, even when it cost him personally. Eventually, God instructed Samuel to anoint a new king, one who would be a man after God's own heart. 1 Samuel 13 verse 14. Samuel obeyed once more, traveling to the house of Jesse in Bethlehem. There, among Jesse's sons, God guided Samuel to the most unlikely choice: David, the youngest, a mere shepherd boy. At God's command, Samuel anointed David, setting into motion a destiny that would shape the future of Israel and the lineage of the Messiah. Though Samuel would not live to see David's reign, his obedience played a vital role in God's redemptive plan. From his first encounter with the voice of God as a boy to his final acts as prophet and intercessor, Samuel's life was marked by unwavering devotion. His journey reminds us that God speaks not only to the qualified but to the willing. That divine call, once answered with "Here I am," echoed through every chapter of his life, proving that a single heart fully yielded to God can change the course of history. In a critical moment of national crisis, Israel turned to Samuel, not as a general but as an intercessor. Their military failures had exposed a deep spiritual fracture. Instead of trusting in symbols like the ark, they now sought divine intervention. In 1 Samuel 7 verse 8, the people plead, "Do not stop crying out to the Lord our God for us, that he may rescue us from the hand of the Philistines." This marked a powerful shift. The people began to understand that their strength lay not in strategy but in surrender. Samuel, embracing his role as mediator, offered a suckling lamb as a whole burnt offering and cried out to the Lord. At that very moment, as the Philistines prepared to attack, the skies shattered with thunder from heaven. God himself entered the battlefield. The enemies were thrown into chaos and Israel prevailed, not by force but by faith. This event wasn't just a military win. It was a supernatural breakthrough that redefined the nation's path and restored its spiritual alignment. To mark this divine intervention, Samuel erected a stone between Mizpah and Shun, naming it Ebenezer, meaning stone of help. He declared, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." 1 Samuel 7 verse 12. This wasn't merely a monument to victory, it was a declaration of dependence. It reminded the people that their strength did not come from earthly kings or weapons but from their covenant with God. Under Samuel's leadership, Israel experienced peace and restoration. The Philistines were subdued, and the stolen cities from Ekron to Gath were returned. 1 Samuel 7 verses 13 to 14. This peace extended even to former enemies like the Amorites. Samuel's leadership brought a sense of divine order. He wasn't confined to a palace or temple. He traveled in a circuit, from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, ensuring that God's justice and instruction reached every tribe, every town, every family. This decentralized but powerful leadership created a united and spiritually awakened nation. At the heart of Samuel's ministry was Ramah, his home and spiritual headquarters. There, he not only judged but built an altar to the Lord, showing that every action he took was anchored in worship. His life was a balance of governance and godliness. He functioned as prophet, priest, and judge, filling roles no one man had ever balanced so effectively. But as he aged, cracks began to form in the system he had built. He appointed his sons as judges, hoping to pass the mantle, but they were nothing like him. They accepted bribes and perverted justice. 1 Samuel 8 verses 1 to 3. This corruption led the elders of Israel to confront Samuel at Ramah. Their solution? Appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. 1 Samuel 8 verse 5. This request cut deeper than just political reform. It was a rejection of God's unique plan for his people. Yet Samuel didn't react in anger. He did what he always did, he prayed. And in that prayer, God revealed a sobering truth. They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me. 1 Samuel 8 verse 7. Have you already clicked on the like button and subscribed to the channel? This helps us understand that you are enjoying our videos and YouTube is sending you more. We count on your help. Let's go back to the video. God's words pierced to the heart of the matter. The desire for a king wasn't merely about governance, it was a reflection of spiritual discontent. Since Egypt, the Israelites had a history of chasing other gods and human solutions. Now, they wanted to mimic pagan nations, forfeiting their divine identity for political normalcy. Yet, God did not deny their request. Instead, he instructed Samuel to warn them. Samuel painted a vivid picture. A king would take their sons for war, their daughters for labor, their fields for profit, and their freedom for control. 1 Samuel 8 verses 10 to 18. But the people would not listen. Their reply was defiant. No, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations. 1 Samuel 8 verses 19 to 20. Despite the warning, they chose conformity over consecration. This wasn't just political rebellion, it was spiritual blindness. Yet Samuel obeyed God, relayed their words, and sent them back to their cities, preparing for a transition he never desired but humbly accepted. 1 Samuel 8 verse 22. Even as Samuel watched the people walk away from God's perfect design, he remained faithful. His mission now shifted, from judge to prophet, from ruler to advisor. God did not leave him without direction. In 1 Samuel 9 verses 15 to 17, the Lord whispered to Samuel, "Tomorrow I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin." That man was Saul. God had seen Israel's cry and would respond not with punishment, but provision. When Samuel laid eyes on Saul, God confirmed it, "This is the man who will govern my people." The story was moving into a new chapter, but Samuel's role was not over. He would be the one to anoint the first king, not as a final act of surrender, but as a steward of God's continuing plan. His spiritual authority remained intact. He was not merely a political figure fading into history. He was the bridge between divine authority and human leadership, guiding Israel from one season to the next with unwavering faithfulness and prophetic clarity. Samuel took a flask of oil and anointed Saul, not just with oil but with divine purpose. This was no simple political gesture, it was a deeply spiritual commission. As the oil ran down Saul's head, the prophet Samuel declared him commander over God's inheritance, signifying that Saul's authority came not from man, but from the Lord himself. In 1 Samuel 10 verses 6 to 7, Samuel prophesied over Saul, saying, "Then the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you, and you will prophesy with them and be turned into another man." These words weren't just hopeful, they were prophetic blueprints. Samuel was preparing Saul not only to lead but to be transformed by the Spirit of God. He urged Saul to act boldly when the signs were fulfilled, declaring, "Do whatever your hand finds to do, for God is with you." This moment was a divine pivot, a transformation of Saul from a simple man into a vessel of God's purpose. Yet, even with the crown, Saul would never outgrow Samuel's guidance. The prophet remained Israel's spiritual compass, ensuring the monarchy began with accountability to the God who anointed it. Despite Saul's rising prominence, Samuel remained Israel's prophetic anchor. He wasn't just a prophet in title, he was a covenant guardian, a voice echoing God's will across the land. In 1 Samuel 12, during his farewell speech as judge, Samuel stood before the nation not to celebrate his retirement, but to renew their covenant. He reminded the people of God's unwavering faithfulness throughout their turbulent history, warning them against rebellion. In verses 14 to 15, Samuel declared, "If you fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice, you and the king will continue following the Lord your God." But rebellion would summon divine judgment. To drive the point home, Samuel called upon the Lord, and thunder and rain fell from a clear sky during the wheat harvest, an unnatural, divine disruption. The people trembled not just from the storm but from the realization of their guilt. They had demanded a king, rejecting God as their sovereign. Yet, Samuel's response wasn't condemnation, it was grace. He told them in verse 20, "Do not be afraid, you have done all this evil, yet do not turn away from the Lord but serve him with all your heart." His words were a bridge between justice and mercy, between human failure and divine patience. Samuel's spiritual authority didn't fade with the crowning of Saul. If anything, it intensified. In 1 Samuel 13, Saul's impatience led him to overstep his bounds, offering sacrifices meant for the prophet. Samuel arrived and rebuked him sharply. "You have done a foolish thing," he said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you." This act wasn't just a breach of protocol, it was spiritual disobedience. Samuel declared that God had already chosen another, a man after his own heart, to replace Saul. This moment was more than correction, it was a turning point. Saul's decline began and Samuel stood firm, not as an advisor to be appeased, but as the uncompromising voice of divine authority. Then came the battle against the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15, where Saul once again disobeyed, sparing what God had commanded to be destroyed. Samuel confronted him with piercing words, "To obey is better than sacrifice." These words struck at the heart of empty religion, exposing that God desires hearts aligned with His will, not rituals divorced from obedience. Saul's kingship was spiritually revoked in that moment, not by vote or battle but by prophetic decree. Even as Saul clung to power, God moved forward. He instructed Samuel to anoint a new king, not among the prominent but among the overlooked. In 1 Samuel 16, the prophet arrived at Jesse's house, eyes scanning Jesse's sons. At the sight of Eliab, Samuel thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here." But God corrected him, "Do not look at his appearance, for the Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." This was more than a lesson in discernment, it was a divine reorientation of what true leadership looks like. Then David, the youngest, the shepherd boy, was brought in. And the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him, this is the one." With oil flowing once more, Samuel consecrated a new king, not yet enthroned but chosen by heaven. In verse 13 we read, "From that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. And Samuel, faithful to the end, returned to Ramah." Though he would not live to see David's ascension, he had fulfilled his mission, passing the flame of God's purpose from one generation to the next. Samuel's legacy echoed beyond the oil and the altar. In 1 Samuel 25 verse 1, the nation mourned his death with a unified sorrow rarely seen. His passing was not just the end of a prophet, it was the end of an era. But his influence remained, imprinted in the character of the kings he anointed and the nation he shaped. Samuel's life was a symphony of obedience, courage, and faith. From his miraculous birth, offered in prayer by a barren woman, to his fearless confrontation of monarchs, Samuel stood as a bridge between eras, between judges and kings, between divine command and human leadership. He never sought popularity, but he carried authority. He never crowned himself, but he moved kings by the word of God. His integrity was unwavering, his loyalty to God unshakable. And so, his story is not merely historical, it is instructional. It calls every believer to ask, will I, like Samuel, listen when God speaks? Will I confront compromise even at great cost? Will I anoint what God chooses even when it defies expectations? If Samuel's journey stirred something in your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of biblical truth and divine purpose. These stories are not ancient myths, they are living lessons. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that obedience matters more than appearances, and that God still speaks through faithful servants. May you walk, like Samuel, with ears tuned to heaven, and hearts ready to respond. Until next time, may the God who called Samuel call you too, and may you answer, "Here I am."